So you mentioned a single patent portfolio. How do you decide, Ian, whether and how to expand coverage for a given patent family? In other words, through continuations, foreign equivalents, that sort of thing.
This is a tricky one, right, for universities. With the limited patent budget, we spend between 1 and 1.5 million or so on patent expenses a year, and that's not an enormous budget to manage our portfolio of 700-ish patents, to prosecute 100 more, and then to also expand our families. I mentioned 60% of our portfolio is life sciences, so oftentimes we'll get things that are too early to really file on, but they're going to publish and present on it, the faculty are, so we have to file on something quite early, and then we're hoping that within 12 months we can expand on that and file continuations and improve on what we've got, and then we can add some small molecule stuff and some applications beyond that. So in the tech side on engineering, it often comes down to again, we utilize the provisional period quite a lot. Last year we filed 100 patents, and about 66 of those I think were provisionals. So we utilize that 12-month period to see how much data we can get, how much customer feedback and validation we can get to make those decisions. If we get that validation, then that's when we make the decision to expand, and we'll build out a family. But oftentimes what we're looking for is for our licensee to build out that family. And that's where we help them, right? We want to get reimbursement for the original patent filing, and then we want our licensee to go out and expand the family, file new ones, and we'll help support that process.
And that's because the licensee is going to have best insight into the market, which countries they're likely to operate in, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we hope they do, and if they don't, if it's a faculty managed startup or something like that, hopefully they're going through our accelerator programs and learning about that stuff. Then by the time that they're filing their own patents, they've partnered with somebody that understands that stuff.
So they have the domain expertise. They've been out in the market, and they're really learning where they need to put up boundaries. What's the role the university plays? Is it guidance, or is it a gate? I mean, can you control whether they file or not?
Yeah, we do. We actually, not all universities do this. We actually like to hand prosecution rights over to our licensees to allow them. We believe they're in the best position to continue to manipulate the portfolio and expand it. I was having a conversation on whether we ask for dual representation or ask for a waiver on that, and often we've gone both ways. Where we feel a little sticky on the relationship, where maybe the negotiations have been a little more adversarial than we would have liked, we'll ask for dual representation. We'll say we don't want you to design around us here, so we're gonna stick to all communications with our attorneys. But where we feel pretty good about the relationship, we're happy to hand off prosecution rights, provide a waiver, and the firm can take it from there, working directly with the licensee.
Now, Myron, tell me about how the MIT TLO works with spinouts. In other words, does MIT ever take a position with a spinout in exchange for a license?
Yeah, I mean, I think the elements of our license are situational, but we frequently will take equity in addition to, again, it really all depends. Life sciences has got a very different model that's, much longer horizon, much more milestone based with, therapeutics that are going through trials and those types of things, and there may be milestone payments, and typically their structure is different because they're usually getting investment from somebody that is probably going to take that drug to market. But I would say, in general, we have both equity-only types of structures, equity plus royalty, and we try to fit the challenge, and we were talking about this before the panel, the challenge is that a lot of our licensing is very early. We're licensing a provisional, we're licensing a patent application that hasn't had a first office action, and so predicting what the right licensing model is for a nascent company that doesn't really know how they're going to make money is challenging. And one of the things that we're running up against now is that in the kind of AI world, and you've seen this in the press, where you're using technology or a patent or software to generate an antibody or some new something new. How do you monetize, or how does the company plan to monetize that? Are they going to use it? Are they going to sell a whole library of molecules? Are they going to create a drug themselves? And so we try to participate in a way that, again, is reflective of the fact that we'd like to get rewarded, and our inventors to get rewarded for the use of the intellectual property. And we try to come up with a structure that makes the most sense. And to Roger's point, I mean, we do a lot of amendments because, you know, the reality is that 12, 18 months, 2, 3 years into an arrangement, that business model could have changed, and the royalty structure or whatever we had set up, you know, needs to be revisited.
So, Reese, tell me about how FAU approaches the issue of how to share in the upside of its portfolio companies.
It's a timely question because it's evolving, and we're kind of learning a lot, taking a broad sample of what's gone before and what we see on the horizon. And I can't say we know for certain that this is a brilliant policy, but it's one we're going to try, and we hope that it kind of balances the equities. So traditionally, if you look at research from about 10, 15 years ago, there's a couple key articles out there that say that university incubators, and certainly not-for-profit incubators, should not take equity for a variety of reasons. You know, on one hand, it might put you at cross purposes, adversarial, when you're supposed to be supportive and nurturing. It's not administratively worth the time because, you know, probably 2/3 of the companies won't pan out anyway. So why go through the fuss of documenting, papering it, monitoring, et cetera, et cetera? Well, what's happening now is it's a product of a number of things, but not the least of which is some success. So there's some companies are becoming wildly successful coming out of incubator programs that are affiliated with universities. The other factor is the cost. These programs cost a fair amount. The program that I run, we finance only 1/3 of it externally through grants and partnerships and donors and earned income, but 2/3 comes out of the university pocket. And so the question is, what do we get for that? And it's not broadly across the university, but sometimes key stakeholder groups, such as your board of trustees, or folks who didn't get the money on the university campus said, well, what is the university getting for that? So we are moving towards a model. Initially, we said, well, since we're giving every company $15,000, in addition to that big basket of goodies I talked about before, free working space, mentoring, instruction, et cetera, we used to do it in the form of a convertible note. And the benefit to that process was that we're trying to align our process with the way entrepreneurs need to understand how you raise capital, private capital, equity capital, and that there's a quid pro quo, so to speak, in that, you know, we'll give you the cash and this big rich basket of benefits, and here's a financial instrument. And by the way, this is no different than you'll find if you raise money in the private markets, which most of you will have to do, you know, talking to the entrepreneurs. Well, we're moving away from that. Now we're trying a bold experiment and trying more that, well, let's take valuation questions out of it. Let's stay off their cap table. Let's not get involved with shareholder votes and be involved in kind of the governance of the company, at least on the shareholder side. And let's instead take a percentage. Is it 1%, is it 2%, whatever, on the back end. And let's not fuss at all unless the company is successful. So if the company's successful, we'll call it a founder's pledge or success fee. Essentially, if you're successful, we ask you to share your success with us so that we can pay it forward to the next generation of entrepreneurs. And we're not going to get involved in your business at all when it comes to the terms of the money and all the other basket of goodies. And let's align our interests on the same side of the ledger. And when you're successful, you agree to pay a certain percent back. Now, the wrinkle is, what if they're not wildly successful? Instead, they turn into what you'd call a lifestyle company, where they're just kind of generating cash and paying the founders a good salary, et cetera. And so we're kind of beginning to look at, well, could we then revert to a royalty model where a very minimum percent of net profit would go back to the company as a thank you from the entrepreneur to the program for helping them get into business. And so stay tuned on the success of those things. If you're looking for experimental language, I know that UC Berkeley and Duke and 2 others, and you can email me, have used the program. It's almost like a turnkey program that comes out of California. I can't remember specifically, but you can find that there. So that's what we're doing.
Let's turn back to IP specifically. And Michael, when you are looking at a university's portfolio, what are some of the indicia that it's going to be marketable?
Marketable in what sense?
That you're willing to invest in it because you think someone is willing to take a license to it.
Right. Again, so with the caveat that we live in the narrow world where marketable doesn't mean like something that some partner wants to commercialize, but could you actually license this? When you're looking at a patent portfolio, I think the number one thing that we look at is the story, right? It's usually pretty easy in the university context. You can check that box, right? In terms of the investigator, what they've done, what they're known for. Someone recently brought up UCSB, and they're actually licensing their patent portfolio in the LED space, and the investigator there is one of the famous inventors of gallium nitride. So everyone knows when it comes to LED that this is the gentleman who's sort of at the forefront of that technology. And I think that matters a lot in terms of the licensing conversations that happen at the potential licensee. I mean, it's not really, I think it's not rocket science so much as it's the university world's a little different, because my experience has been, unfortunately, because there's limited budgets and you can't keep applications open like you would. A lot of times you unfortunately see that the invention kind of died in the specification, right? And there wasn't the budget to close it out, and the claims are close, but they're not where you wanted them to be. More often than not, I think that actually, unfortunately, it's like, it kills me to see, but that's what happens. Yeah, it happens a lot. But it's really, I mean, it's for what our space is. It's the invention story. It's obviously how strong is the infringement, how big is the market. It's the typical stuff that one looks at in patents. How valid is it, and obviously what's the size of the potential licensing potential of the portfolio. And I just anecdotally, what I've noticed, which is interesting in the university world, when you're thinking about valuation, is for some reason, for instance, some of our district courts have been friendly to universities, but our Court of Appeals hasn't. I mean, it hasn't been. I know that you've experienced that. BU actually is an interesting case study. BU actually had an LED patent portfolio that they licensed to the entire industry. Everyone took a license to BU's LED portfolio. It was one of the sort of foundational LED portfolios in the world. I think the gentleman who won the Nobel Prize for LED mentioned the BU patent in his acceptance speech, licensed it to the entire industry, a lot of it without litigation. Did have to litigate in district court here, and won, I think, close to a $40 million verdict. And we kind of just study what's happening with all these things. And it went up to the Court of Appeals, and they invalidated the patent on a 112 enablement issue, right? And it's like, it's just crazy, crazy.